Welcome to this new Tech Captains episode. So this time we are very lucky to have Richard Rosenberg, who is a CTO at Spendesk and previously was CTO at the Financial Times at Hotels.com, part of the Expedia group. So hi Richard, how are you today?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And as usual, I'm accompanied by Gareth to have this discussion with you. Hi Gareth.
Hi guys. Hi Richard. Nice to see you.
Good. So I'd like to go directly to the core of your career path. Like you've worked for 25 years roughly in the tech industry. You've had different roles. You've been CTOs in a few recognized brands. Like maybe you can tell us more about like how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I think you are politely saying that I'm very old, which is fine. So I was I suppose you'd say I was a software engineer by trade. That's my background, software engineering. I think I was most interested by software that actually looked at real human problems and looked to see how by writing software you could solve those problems and maybe even change customer behavior. And I spent a long time of my career at Sky in the UK, and I think this is something they do really, really well. I think that's one thing I took from my time at Sky is this, I don't know if agile product engineering process is the right term, but their ability to think of what problems their customers are facing and work out what solutions they can find to them. I think they're really, really good at that. They make good products. I'll give one real example, and this is showing my age. And so I actually went to Sky to lead their red button interactive TV team. So this was before we had smartphones. It was before we had good connections to the internet. TV had just gone digital, which meant you had a little box that went under your TV and you could write little bits of software that ran little programs on your TV when you pressed the red button. And what this meant, that all sounds very good, but unless you've got a real problem you're trying to solve, it's useless. And so what it meant is while you were watching the TV, you could press your red button, for example, and order a pizza. And the pizza would be delivered while you're watching TV. And that, as a specific use case, was really, really exciting because there was no other way of doing it. The other way of doing it was much harder. And so finding that software solution was really, really exciting to me. And then as Apple and Google invented their phones and we got better connections to the broadband, that was no longer the best solution. So you had to move on from there. So that's where I think I really took from Sky.
So at Sky you went from like a developer to like head of software engineering, and like today we see, and I'm sure you see also a lot in the team that you lead, that people will stay 2-3 years and it will be considered as a lot. And how do you see that, the advantages, the pros, the thing that you got from staying a long time in a single company? Because very often you hear that if you don't stay at least 3 years in a company, you never actually face crisis. You never actually work on something that is deep, like changing an architecture of something, facing big problems. So what's your experience?
So I think it probably just looking at the time you're at a single company is probably not enough data to work from, in the sense that, yes, I think I was at Sky for 16 years in total, which is a huge amount of time. But actually, within that time, there were so many changes in technology, in industry, in Sky's strategy, in what they were doing, that I felt like I was always learning, I was always growing. There was always a new technology challenge. And so it wasn't that I was doing 16 years sort of in
Yeah.
exactly the same role, same thing. So I think that to me, well, I'm only talking personally. To me, that's what I think is really important. That you are always have a learning that you can do in your role. Are you growing in your role?
And while you were at Sky, I mean, I did look at your bio, and I'm trying to remember. Was the sort of advent of streaming? Were people looking at that, and was that sort of coming along? And while you were there?
Yes, very much so. In fact, I think it was my team that actually first created, and I think it is right to say, the world's first subscription live TV product on an iPhone. We were actually showcased at WWDC that year. And so, yeah, yes, very much. And
Was that
again,
nerve-wracking? Was that nerve-wracking waiting for that to work?
well, it wasn't nerve-wracking in the WWDC sense because they are very clever at
Right.
making sure their their demos are all very well made.
Very slick.
But
Very slick. Yeah.
yes, how we did this is a very, I think, quite an interesting story as well because we knew we had the challenge. We were set the challenge. Sky, so football is obviously still one of Sky's premier rights that they have, and being able to watch the football on your mobile phone was a key thing that we wanted to try and get right. And we were set that challenge. And at the time, we didn't know how to do it. So we went and talked to lots of companies to try and get their insight. And I very quickly came to the conclusion, maybe rightly or wrongly, that no one in the world had actually done it, and therefore no one really knew how to do it. And so the best thing that we could do was put together a very small team of our smartest engineers, sit them in the same room, and get them iterating and solving this problem. And that's how we created the product and made sure that the product we created was safe and secure and protected the content.
I see. And just to get now to where you at now, so Spendesk, so it's a company card and a spend management software SaaS that full disclosure, both myself and Gareth are clients of in our respective companies. So we know quite well the product.
Amazing, thank you.
And I'm sure a lot of the people who are listening now are also familiar. Like, so the company was created in 2016, has more than 600 people now, and it reached unicorn status, I think, sometime last summer. So you've been there for 6-7 months now. How do you find the experience
Yeah.
so far, and how is your role arriving in an existing unicorn company compared to previous companies where you worked at that were not scale-ups but more established companies?
Well, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I know you were saying you were probably being polite and nice and saying you're familiar with the product and you like it, but it is amazing to see how many interviews that I've been in, sort of interviewing engineers or leaders to join SpendDesk, where when I first ask how do you know about SpendDesk, the answer is, well, my company use it and I love it. I think it's a great product. And that's a very good place to start, in the sense that I think we have such an amazing product that is really trying to disrupt a really, really interesting space. Now, you're right. This is a company of around 600 people. And if you look at Expedia, for example, the whole Expedia group, that was tens of thousands of people. So it is a very different challenge. But it's very much a challenge that I actively wanted to go after, and it's actually a very exciting place to be.
I see, but and before going into more technical bits with Gareth, I think he has some more technical questions. But I was interested into the fact that so the company is French, it's based out of Paris, and you're in London, if I'm not mistaken. So how does that work? Do you have an office? Do you work half remote, half co-working? How often do you have to actually go to the headquarters in Paris? How is the communication with the founders and who are native French native and living there? How's all of that playing out for you?
So I should say, so yes, the head office is in Paris. We do also have offices in London and Berlin and Hamburg. And so the office in London is, I think there's probably around 100 people in London at the moment,
Okay.
approximately. And I am probably, I would say, in the Paris office, probably once or twice a month. It's relatively easy to get there with the Eurostar. And generally, I'm probably in an office probably 2 or 3 days a week. I think at SpendDesk, we have really thought hard about how to make the global nature of the world and the fact that people are not necessarily tied to an office, but how do you make that process still work? I assume like a lot of companies nowadays, we're successfully working in this hybrid nature.
So just going a little bit further on SpendDesk itself. I mean, it was interesting when we use obviously a few bits of it here at Healthily. But when I was doing some research, I hadn't realized quite the breadth of functionality that you have. What was the hardest thing, do you think, that they've built, and why do you think that was hard?
Oh, that is a good question. I think the hardest thing, and I don't think this is necessarily the hardest thing from a technology challenge, but it maybe points back to what I was saying earlier around really thinking about the problems that a human has and trying to figure out what is the right solution to get that. And so actually trying to, I think the way most, or the traditional way of financial software seems to be designed is they're thinking about it in a way that thinks about the problems of the finance team. And while that is very true, the way the clever thing that I think Spendesk did at the start was to try and solve their problems by I think giving absolute full transparency around all of the data and the processes around how a company spends its money, to try and almost, empower each employee to manage their own world. I think quite often the processes of a company around how it spends its money can be very complex or even very political. And actually trying to give some transparency to the data, we've seen both from me personally using SpendDesk at SpendDesk, but from our customers too, that really changes the way that money is spent in a company.
That's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I suppose you're right that there probably would have been a tendency for a different business to go, okay, CFOs are our main stakeholders or the main people using the functionality. Let's focus on what their pain points are. But really, money permeates every business. I mean, I go in, I actually have in my email today some emails from SpendDesk, right, looking for receipts and things like that. And so when it does the automatic attachment, I just think, oh, that's great. That's one less thing I have to do, right? So yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, well, I mean, one real example, I think if I was to, for all those people who are listening in companies that, like in the companies I used to work for, things like you'd go on a trip and you use your card, you have expenses to claim. The expense claiming process used to be just so painful.
Yeah.
And the pain, because it was so painful, it meant people often took their time doing it. People often delayed doing it. People often didn't submit their receipts well enough. And that made it worse for the finance team. Whereas at SpendDesk, because that process is just so easy and you can just quickly take a snap with something from our mobile app, we've found 95% of receipts are submitted within 2 days of actually the spend happening. And that makes it much better for the finance team. And so month-end closing is 4 times faster for finance teams than in other teams. And that's where I think the value is.
What tech do you have behind? Well, what's your tech stack behind to get that running?
So I don't think actually our tech stack is very, very, I'd say, industry standard. I mean, it's probably not interesting to go into the real specifics of each piece, but we're on AWS. We use TypeScript and Node.js. We use React at the front end. But really, I think these were all chosen for ease, flexibility, and in the realization that at the start, we wanted to find a stack that we could easily hire for. We could hire engineers that could get going quickly, and that we knew we could evolve as the product evolved. So we try and think about not just the actual technology, but the sort of long-term ability to support it and sustain it, and practically, like, can we hire developers to work on it, is going to be a really important part of that. I don't think for our needs we need to be like super niche or have some specific thing that only 3 people in the world know. I think we can be quite standardized and make sure we can hire the best people to do it. We also have quite a lot of flexibility in our processes, in our systems, in our way that says if there is a key component that does say we need to write something in Go or something like, we can do that, and that's okay.
We've had a few people that we've done the previous podcast on where we come back to this issue of, not being on the bleeding edge of tech, because one of the big considerations as CTO is finding people, right, and finding good people. And so that just on your cloud side of things, the other bit I was interested in, because it looks like you run Kafka, I think, from what I saw. Do you use a lot of AWS services, or is there anything that you actually have decided to run yourself for whatever reason, like Kafka?
No. So yes, we use a lot of AWS services. Yeah. And it's interesting, and I'm sure a lot of companies who are going through the same journey as Spendesk are going through. There have been parts of the journey where growth has been the most important thing. And so the efficiency of your AWS stack and the efficiency of how you are building your architecture has been secondary to the speed at which you can just build systems. I think right now we are shifting that balance and looking at also efficiency is a big part of what we're thinking about in the future as well, to try and think about the cost of our infrastructure.
Yeah, and then so just related to that, then the other bit I was curious about, as you're then looking for these efficiencies, one bit of tech I'm quite interested in is WebAssembly. Are you sort of looking at that because you use Node on your back end?
We've looked, I would say, at a very light level. Yes, we've just done some playing, but nothing in a huge way at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the tooling for building back-end services is still a bit nascent, perhaps, but I think there's going to be a huge future for it. I mean, there was a one of the guys behind Docker said that if WebAssembly had been around, 12 years ago, they wouldn't have needed Docker, right? So it's a very interesting bit of technology. So, yeah.
And in terms of like, so we have a small tradition, as you know, in this podcast that every guest suggests a book that they really liked. So you actually, it seems like an avid reader because you send at least 5 or 6 books that you really like. So it seems
Yeah,
like you
sorry
do
about
read
that.
a lot. I don't know if it's only work-related books or also novels, but there's one that seemed to stand out from the list, which is The Chimp Paradox by Professor Steve Peters. I don't know if you can tell us more why this book and why you would recommend it.
Yeah, so this book was actually introduced to me during my time at Sky. I was fortunate to hear Dave Brailsford, who I think he is now INEOS sporting director, but he was the person who set up Team Sky, the Olympic cycling, and then the professional cycling team. And he is a very, I think, an inspiring person talking about, I guess, just how to get the best performance out of yourself. And obviously, a big part of individuals' performance is to do with understanding how their brain works. And I thought, and so Dave Brailsford used this when he was talking about the Team Sky athletes. But also when I read it, it's one of those books. I think these sort of self-help books, I think, are very personal to individuals. I think there are millions of them out there, and you can read some and think, and you can read some and they really resonate and connect with you. And this is one that really resonated with me because it sort of explains the way it tries to explain the way your brain processes things and the way your brain works, using a simple analogy of you having a sort of little chimp in your mind that can suddenly react to things. And that's not you, it's just this little chimp in your mind. And when you read through it and you read through the implications of that and you read through ways in which you can recognize that and then control that, I think that is quite transformational. It's interesting. I'm really annoying in my family because I talk about this, and now even my kids know that if I get angry, and it makes me even more angry when this happens. My kids will say, "Oh, Dad's chimp is out now. Everyone be careful," type thing. So I'd really recommend reading it because it explains really well how your brain processes things.
So is the idea then that this chimps can sometimes sabotage or undermine you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's all going back to the, I guess, the original, what's the evolutionary way in which your brain has evolved. But yes, very much so.
For some reason, I've got in my mind the beginning of 2001, wasn't it? When he throws,
Yeah,
the bit,
yeah,
the scene I'm thinking of, right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. And so based on these books, like you've read a lot, you have a lot of experience. If today there's a 22 years old that comes to you starting in the industry, in the tech industry, and comes from a device, or even even a 35 years old that just did a boot camp to change careers and comes from advice, what would you tell someone who's new to the industry?
If I was giving advice to a new techie, I would say, firstly, think of the type of company that you work for. And what I mean by that is think of the company culture that you are going in. What I've learned is that is really, really important. I think if you go to any company's website, they probably all have the same type of inspiring words printed as their values. But the reality is companies do feel very different, and the behaviors you see at a company really come from the exec down, and they are very different. Now, this is very personal, but different people achieve their best in different environments. So some people want a really aggressive, combative, competitive world, and that gets the best out of them. Some people that would make them perform worse and want a much more collaborative, people-focused company. And so that makes a difference. So think about that. I would also think of, if you're specifically going into engineering, how is engineering seen in the company? Some companies see the engineering team as a annoying cost, and therefore the real goal is to keep the cost to a minimum. But some companies see that the engineering is producing the output, so it's really core to that company. I'd also say, from an engineering perspective, that sort of culture of continuous improvement is more important than the actual specific technology stack that they use, or the brand, or the actual end product. I think this culture of having this engineering excellence culture of saying we want to constantly improve, we want to constantly learn, we will have a diverse set of metrics and we will just get better. I think that culture is more important than a specific.
But it's interesting you mentioned the working environment, because Gareth, I think you had something you wanted to ask regarding the working the team structures and the squads.
Yeah, I noticed again. I was looking at some of your job ads and trying to figure out how you work there, and it looked like you are organized in using squad models,
Yep.
which I think both Ron and I have used, and it's obviously popularized by Spotify, I think, originally. And I was
Yep.
curious because what I did then notice was it seemed to indicate that you had team leads on the squads, which is kind of unusual. Are they cross domain, or if they are there, I mean, how do they actually work within that model?
So yes, you are right. I call it the Spotify model as well, but I'm sure it's all been slightly evolved since then. But yes, we have a set of people that we amass as a squad around certain business problems, and on that squad, you may have a product person, a designer, some engineers, etc. And so from a line management perspective, the engineering part would report up into me, and the product people would report up into our chief product officer. But really, if you got that team and we got this right, and you was to say, what team are you on? They wouldn't say I'm on the engineering team. They'd say I'm on the mobile team, or I'm on the employee squad, or whatever. With regards to, I guess, leadership, or how that goes from just a line management perspective, yes, we have. So the engineers would go up into initial leads, who go up into engineering managers, who then go up into directors. And then they are just sort of a sort of pyramid there from a line management perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I guess the last question I had, which isn't really organization, I was just, again, curious. I mean, obviously for you, managing the money of these companies, I would, and being a target, right, for bad guys. We're all target for bad guys if we have a presence on the internet. And I noticed somewhere on one of your engineering blogs, there was mention of a fraud detection algorithm. So I was just curious if that, can you say anything about that? Is that something proprietary, or is there anything you can share about what you do there?
So I don't think it's right for me to share the real details of
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
But you are right to say, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that there are two parts to this. Us trying to detect customer fraud is something that is is absolutely critical as well. But that's separate, I guess, to making sure that our customer data is protected and protected from attack. And I think Spendesk, as with all companies, as the bigger the company, the more of a target that you are going to be. And so as Spendesk is growing, it is getting ever bigger of a target. And so we have to really think about the security of our data more and more, and have put a lot more focus on that over the last, well, even 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I mean, Richard, I would love to speak for hours, but I'm conscious everybody has commitments, including everyone listening, maybe arriving to the end of the tube or train journey. So maybe we'll get you back in a year or two when you've spent more time at Spendesk and you've had some crazy stories.
Love to.
So Richard, thank you very much for joining us today, and for anyone listening, we'll be back in 2 weeks, every other Tuesday, Gareth and I. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Richard. It's been a pleasure.